All right, I think I'll get us started and people will continue to trickle in as we take care of a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This session is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording as well as resources that we discussed during the event. As I mentioned earlier, I'll just say it again, this is another episode in these webinar series that we have been doing during this year when meeting in person has not been possible. We also have a special webinar page on our website, so if you want to find this one as well as past webinars, you can find them linked there. This is an active session and we definitely welcome your engagement. We invite you to add questions to the Q&A as the presentations are happening. We will answer a couple of them following each presentation and then more Q&A session at the end. We will get to as many as we're able and we'll provide you with my contact information if you have a pressing question that we're not able to get to. So thank you for your patience with that. The chat box for any comments you have or other resources that you would like to share. We have a great support team here to help us, including Iris on the Zoom side and Katie and Katya on Facebook Live. They have CEC in their names, so if you need technical assistance, you can reach out to them directly. Before we get going and introduce our speakers, we want to set the stage for you about why we chose this topic. It's a thing that CEC and Channel Keeper are directly associated with, but it has implications for the work that we do. I found a quote from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that really encapsulates these actions. Switching to renewable energy plays a vital role in addressing climate change, but this alone will not be enough. In order to achieve targets on climate, it is critical that we transform how we design, make, and use products and food. To provide a little more detail on that, 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from how we make and use products, as well as how we grow and distribute food. A circular system designs out a lot of this way innovations like reusable packaging and regenerative agriculture practices. CEC's role here today is to advance this conversation with you, the community, sharing thought leadership through today's presentations and providing you with resources. Our goal is to create a dialogue about our consumption habits and how they might be adjusted over time to factor out the waste that contributes to climate change. As we reflect back on this, our 50th anniversary year for CEC, it's a good time to point out that when CEC launched our Fossil Free by 33 initiative over a decade ago, the focus was on transitioning to renewable energy and green transportation. Years ago, there were no affordable electric vehicles on the market. Today, there are dozens. 10 years ago, solar panels were attractive mainly to the eco-conscious. Today, solar-powered electricity is cheaper than coal-powered electricity. A few years ago, we added a food program to broaden our focus to include regenerative agriculture as a climate solution. Similarly, we also see that community can't fully tackle climate change without addressing the goods and services life cycle of consumer products. We have been working on the reduction of certain consumer products with Santa Barbara Channel Keeper for more than a decade. And I am proud to introduce my partner in all things plastic and today's co-moderator, Penny Owens.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Well, like CEC, this topic, circular economy, is not something that Santa Barbara Channel Keeper is directly associated with, but it also has implications on our work to protect and restore the Santa Barbara Channel and its watersheds, as well as climate change. Plastic is ubiquitous. It's everywhere we look for it in the environment. It's in the air we breathe, the food we eat, our streams, rivers, and oceans. It pollutes at all stages of its life cycle, from extraction, processing, and production, and end of life. And as we've talked about in previous plastic webinars, the plastic production, particularly plastic packaging, is projected to increase significantly in the coming decades. In fact, the industry's stated goal is to increase plastic production from 8% of current total fossil fuel use to 25% in the next 5 years. Together, Channel Keeper and CEC have successfully advocated for 6 regional laws to reduce single-use plastic. These laws have resulted in significant reduction at the source. More than 140 million plastic bags per year have been eliminated from circulation in our region thanks to these laws, and in addition to significant reduction of foam-to-go containers and plastic straws, lids, and cutlery. We're not done yet. We look forward to advocating the City of Goleta and Santa Barbara County to adopt EPS to-go foam container laws as well. In addition to reducing single-use plastic in our own backyard, these local laws help demonstrate and build support for statewide laws, which can have greater impact, and those can then lead to support for national legislation and greater system changes. Through Channel Keeper's 20 years of keeping watch for clean water, and in particular, our past 10 years working with CEC and other community partners, we see again and again how important education is. We also see the importance and the need to take a step back from, is my yogurt container really recyclable? Or what do I do with this plastic wrapper? Can it go to the film plastic diversion project? And we need to look at how we can make meaningful changes towards more sustainable systems regionally, nationally, and even globally, including of our consumer products, many of which at the end of their life cycle in our current system end up polluting our streams and rivers and oceans. So thanks from Channel Keeper and me for joining us for this really important conversation today. We really look forward to learning with you and to the discussions that follow. And now we want to hear from you, all of our attendees here. We have our very first poll of the webinar today, and we're going to ask you a question looking at your familiarity with the circular economy concept. Iris, thanks so much. So, are you familiar with the term circular economy? I'll give folks a few minutes. And Iris, was there a second poll or is it just the one?
There's two questions on this poll.
Yeah, it was like a two-part.
Yeah, so do any products currently used meet that definition? Packaging, take back for reuse, textile return for reprocessing. So we'll give folks to answer the poll, and then when we've got the results, we will share them with you. And also the next little segment that we have for you is kind of a treat. CEC's in-house graphic designer has created a little video on circular economy that we will share. So 81% of you are familiar with the term circular economy, and 60% of you have products that you use that meet the definition, which is really nice to see that much familiarity, and also that you are also already actively participating in this. So we have a very advanced group here with us today. Thank you for that. So Iris, let's run that video.
All righty, thanks so much again to the Pharos team, Lisa and Andrew with CEC for that great little intro video. It is now our pleasure to introduce Dr. Roland Geyer, Professor of Environmental Science with the Bren School at UC Santa Barbara. Roland Geyer is interested in the life cycle of manufactured goods, the processes in the form of energy and material flows that are related to transforming raw materials into products, and ultimately waste, and in the environmental and economic potential of reuse and recycling activities. He uses the approaches and methods of industrial ecology, such as life cycle assessment and materials flows analysis, to assess energy efficiency and pollution prevention strategies based on recycling, reuse, and material and technology substitution. Dr. Geyer also combines these approaches with research methods from operation management and other fields in order to study the relationship between environmental performance, economic viability, and technological and operational feasibility of energy efficiency and pollution prevention strategies. His overarching goal is to help develop the science and knowledge necessary to reduce the environmental impact from industrial production and consumption. Dr. Geyer, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Penny, for that kind introduction. Kathy, for having me being part of this. I'm ready to have the slides shared. Just to let you know, I've been thinking about this for over 20 years now. So I actually, when I started researching in 1998, reuse and recycling, we did not call it circular economy. That's a newer development. So I just used to call it reuse and recycling, pretty much still do. But I've been thinking about the circular economy ever since, still do research basically daily on it. So that's a lot of data, a lot of information. I have 10 minutes to share it with you. So it's just going to be a couple of highlights, a few things that I feel really strongly about. And yeah, if you want to learn more about my research and my group, I finally have a website up and running. So here's the URL down there. You're looking at lovely Bren Hall here, but let's move on to the next slide. So for me, the circular economy takes pre and post-consumer waste and turns it into useful things that I call secondary outputs, secondary products or components or materials. And as you know, we very much still have a linear, I would call it a linear production paradigm. So we have a supply chain that makes virgin materials and then turns them into components, assembles the components into a product, a final product, which then gets sold, delivered, and then we use it in our households. Until it's no longer of use for us, either because it's reached its end of its life or we're just done with it. And then usually the fate is disposal. So typically that means landfill or worse. So that's how most things are made, used, and disposed of. So the idea of the circular economy is to close that linear supply chain into and turn it into a supply loop. And essentially we can do this on sort of three levels. We can do it on a material level, on a component level, or a product level. And there are many words that describe these sort of basic things: refurbishing, remanufacturing, reuse. Recycling typically means material recovery. But in the end, it sort of comes down to sort of roughly those three levels. Are we recovering materials only? Are we recovering components from an end-of-life product? Or are we trying to actually give the entire product a second life? So just examples, material recycling, we recycle metals, paper, cardboard, glass, plastics. Not that much. There are some positive stories, but overall the recycling rate in the US of plastics has gone below 9%, sadly. So, which is why plastics is very much in the news at the moment. Component reuse examples would be reusing building components, reusing spare parts from scrapped vehicles rather than buying brand new spare parts from the vehicle manufacturers. Retread tires would be an example. When it comes to reusing an entire product, examples would be cell phones. Cell phones last much longer than we typically use it. We only use it for 1 to 2 years, but the actual product lifetime technically of a cell phone is more like 8 to 10 years. So we could reuse it multiple times, and there are business models out there that reuse cell phones. Other electronics, the same. Secondhand clothes are an example of product reuse. Refurbished furniture would be another example. So many examples of reuse happening, recycling happening. Having said that, we still very much live in a linear production paradigm world, and there are reasons for that. Next slide, please. Before we move on to the obstacles, the challenges of the circular economy, how do we determine the environmental benefits of reuse and recycling? And here it's essentially, we need to look at the additional environmental impacts that come through collection of the waste or the end-of-life product, and then the additional impacts of reprocessing, be that a recycling plant or a remanufacturing process. Those are additional impacts which need to be weighed against the avoided impacts that will determine the benefits of reuse and recycling. And here it's avoided impacts of primary material and component production and avoided impacts of waste disposal. And on the right side, you can see I have a little example for you. So 1 kilogram of recycled PET, that's your #1 plastic that soda bottles are made out of. You can see that impacts of collection and reprocessing add up to a bit more than a kilogram of CO2 equivalent. So that's the indicator for climate change. However, if that recycled PET avoids a kilogram of virgin PET, and then therefore also avoids waste disposal, a kilogram of PET, then that reduces or saves emissions of over 2.7, 2.8 almost kilogram of CO2 equivalent. So we have a net environmental benefit of 1.6 kilograms CO2 equivalent. So you can see that in order to be an environmental success, the circular economy needs to reduce our use of primary resources and our consumption of primary products. So that is critical for the circular economy to reduce environmental impacts. And so sometimes people say, well, what else should it do? And it could, in the worst case, it could lead to overall increased consumption. So making lots of recycled material available doesn't necessarily mean that we will use less material overall. So that those two things need to play hand in hand for the circular economy to really make an environmental difference. And just keep in mind that climate change is one environmental impact. CO2 is one environmental indicator. There may be other environmental reasons and indicators we want to use to determine the benefits of the circular economy. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, the circular economy does have some serious obstacles to overcome. And so I try to break them down into 3 groups of obstacles. The first one, just hit again this, I have a little, so next slide basically. There it is. So of course we need to, first we need to access the end-of-life products. We need to be able to access them. We need to collect them. And so that I call that the collection constraints. This waste is very dispersed. It may not be economically viable to even go out and collect it. So someone in the industry called the PET bottle the other day the rock star of plastic recycling. And so sadly, the rock star of plastic recycling still only has a collection rate of 30% in overall in the US. So, so we can see collection can be a serious constraint to making the circular economy happen. Next, please. Once we have things collected, say here in Santa Barbara, we are lucky we have curbside recycling, then the reprocessing needs to actually be technical or economically viable. So it's not good enough to collect the waste and be able to do so, but we need technologies, we need processes that can convert those end-of-life products and wastes into useful secondary output materials or components. So one example that here in California we're currently struggling with is that the fact that PET thermoforms, so clamshells, here's one example, are currently not being recycled. So PET bottles frequently get converted into when they get recycled into those thermoform that we may buy our berries in, but then these containers are currently not being recycled for sort of a mix of technical and economic reasons. So that will be the next obstacle. Next slide. And then finally, of course, it's not good enough to just generate secondary products, but we need market demand for those products. So we as households need to want to use those secondary products instead of the new products, which very often are unfortunately very cheap. So the economics can be really challenging there. So as an example here, I did many years ago look into markets for secondhand or refurbished electronics, and it's just in developed economies, the demand for refurbished electronics is just very, very low, for better or worse. So final slide, please. Oh no, I don't have, all right, I don't have another slide. So that is just a very, very brief overview of some very basic considerations. I'll hope you find that stimulating, useful, and I'll hand it over to Kathy and Penny.
Thank you very much, Dr. Geyer. Really appreciated that very broad but very informational overview. We have a moment here. We could take a couple of questions if anybody had any. I don't see any yet in the Q&A box. One thing that struck me when you were talking is that you said this might lead to increased consumption, and so something that I think about when I think that if we're going to cut some production out of the system is where the job's going to go. So do you see this as a job creation opportunity?
Absolutely, I think there is, and I actually think it's really important that we sort of point out the social and environmental sustainability benefits of a circular economy. So what does happen is that reuse and recycling activities tend to be more labor intensive than virgin production activities, just because some of those processes are harder to automate and sort of just have it run by machines. And that can create economic challenges, right? Because then you have a high labor cost. But I actually think we could turn this argument of it on its head and say, no, this is actually great, because not only do we generate environmental benefits, but we generate social sustainability co-benefits by creating jobs.
Excellent. That's a great, side co-benefit. And then we have one question here from Elena Ortiz. Is the low PET bottle recycling due to people simply not recycling them and them ending up in the landfill, or due to contaminated bottles because they're being recycled without being cleaned first? So asking why that is, that low rate on PET recycling.
Right. I do think, obviously, in California, the collection rate is much, much higher. And the reason for that is that California has a so-called bottle bill. So, right, there is the CRV redemption value, which sort of adds an economic incentive to actually return the bottle. And we do have curbside recycling available in in many places in California, but that is simply not the case throughout the country. So very often it's, yes, once a PET soda bottle makes it into a recycling stream, I would say it's almost guaranteed to be recycled. With PET bottles, in sort of, it's mostly just creating the incentive to the households and the individual consumer to actually make sure this item gets returned. Same thing with the aluminum can, right, which has that has phenomenal economics, and the environmental benefits of aluminum recycling are outstanding. But even with the aluminum can, the collection rate, US average, is only 50%, sadly, currently.
Yeah, that is really low. Hopefully we can improve on that. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for letting us take a couple questions there, and I see there's more questions popping in, but we'll move along now and come back to a broader Q&A session as we close out. But now I would like to introduce you to our next speaker, Sarah Palladino, who is the Community Relations Manager and Culture Steward at Toad & Co. You may remember they used to be called Horny Toad, it's this company. Sarah aims to connect Toad & Co. with environmental and social initiatives within our community. She embraces the culture and mission statement of Toad & Co. to live every day as an adventure, and hopes to inspire others to do the same. Sarah's background is in environmental geoscience, and she has previous experience as a consultant leading environmental remediation projects. Sarah is an environmental and sustainability advocate who believes in grassroots initiatives that can spark widespread change. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Kathy. So I think we have a poll to start off the presentation. Iris, if you want to pop that up. Thank you. So what's the most sustainable item of clothing? See the results here, see what everyone's thinking. All right, so we've got overwhelming for our vintage items purchased secondhand. Everyone's going in the right direction, but it's a trick question because the answer is none of the above. The most sustainable item of clothing is the one you already own. So we're gonna go a little bit into that in the presentation, but thank you, Kathy, for the introduction. As she mentioned, I'm gonna be talking about Toad & Co. and why the circular economy is important in the apparel industry and what options you have as a consumer to make the most sustainable choices. So Toad & Co. is you can flip up the slide, please. Thank you. Toad & Co. is a Santa Barbara-based outdoor lifestyle clothing brand. And since 1997, we have been focused on cleaning up the apparel industry, educating consumers on eco-materials, and trying to build the most sustainable and circular business that we can. Next slide, please. And the apparel industry is unfortunately the 4th largest polluter on Earth. And that makes a lot of sense because we live in a society that values fast fashion and the ability to buy a lot of really cheap items and then throw them away when they're out of style or not wanted anymore. But making clothes has a huge environmental impact. And it goes from everywhere from massive amounts of water consumption to chemical additives used to treat and dye the yarn, to greenhouse gas emissions from production to deforestation and to soil degradation. And what's even worse about all of this is that that clothing item that just made a huge impact on the environment will likely end up getting incinerated or will end up in a landfill. So that's why as an organization that is ultimately creating more clothes, it's essential that we follow a circular business model and make the most sustainable choices. Next slide, please. So in a circular model, we look at every step in our supply chain to reduce waste and increase longevity of a garment. We start with only using low impact materials and we design durable items that are made to last And we only work with production partners that are environmentally focused and hold up to our environmental standards and required certifications. And once our garments actually make it to a store or our e-commerce platform to be sold, we work with partners who are also focused on the circular economy to repair, reuse, and recycle that garment so that it ends up in a circular model and there isn't any waste associated and they don't end up in the landfill. So I'm going to be going into some detail about each of these steps. Next slide. So if you're making a new garment, you have to start with new raw materials. And most fabrics used in fast fashion are synthetic, such as polyester, acrylic, and nylon. And these are actually made from fossil fuels, and they're extremely harmful to the planet to make. Those materials contrast with natural materials like cotton and wool and bamboo. And although natural fibers are definitely a step up from synthetics, there are sustainable natural fiber options such as organic cotton, hemp, and tencel, which have a really low impact on the environment and are much better for production. Organic cotton is grown using no GMOs, no toxic chemicals, and uses traditional farming techniques, which result in 80% less water and 62% less energy to produce than conventional cotton. Hemp is another great plant that is a really low impact, doesn't use any pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, or GMO seeds. And hemp is actually also a phytoremediative plant, so it decontaminates soil by absorbing pollutants through its root system and cleans shallow groundwater and associated soils. Tencel's another really incredible plant. It's actually harvested from sustainable eucalyptus trees. And these trees don't require a lot of space or water to grow naturally. And so it makes them inherently good on the environment. The wood pulp that is used and is processed and actually creates the yarn is made with non-toxic solvents in a closed loop system where 99% of those solvents are actually recovered and recycled. So there's very minimal waste associated with that process. In addition to using some of these natural and sustainable fibers, we also look to third-party certifications like BlueSign and Ecotex to make sure that that material that we're using has stood up to the rigors of the certification process so that it actually meets our sustainability standards. Next slide. So all of the natural materials that I just spoke about, they're great and they're sustainable and much better than synthetics. But if we want to make an item out of virgin material, it's going to use natural resources no matter what. And so that's why if we are trying to progress to 100% circular system, products no longer have a beginning, middle, and end. We want every product to add value to their ecosystem. And once they stop being used, they go back into the useful cycle. So we make clothes out of recycled cotton, recycled wool, and recycled polyester, where recycled cotton is literally just shredded up old fabric pieces of cotton and doesn't take any water or chemicals to make. And recycled polyester is actually made from post-consumer plastic water bottles, and which is actually taking the water bottle straight out of the landfill, which it shouldn't be in the first place, and making it into something that can be reused and used again. Next slide. So in the design process, we're also designing so that we're making sure that all of our materials that we're using are designed to last a long time and can remain relevant. And in fast fashion, clothes go in and out of style every season. And so instead, we're trying to create intentional and classic designs that will never actually end up as waste. So one really easy way to have a sustainable and circular wardrobe is to purchase vintage items instead of brand new items. And shopping for vintage is not what it used to be. You don't have to spend hours in dusty and smelly racks looking for like one good item. On Tote & Co.'s website, you can actually buy vintage items just as easily as you buy a new item. And we've actually partnered with a really great organization, ThreadUp, which is an e-commerce platform. And they're committed to circularity and giving clothes a second life. So it's a really easy process. You literally ask for a clean out kit. They send you a free shipping label and you put all your old clothes in a box. And for every one item that you send back to them and goes back into the circular economy, it actually extends the life of that garment for 2.2 years and reduces its carbon, waste, and water footprints by 82%. So it's a win-win. And if they can resell the item, they're going to send you a check. And if they can't resell it, then they're going to recycle it responsibly. And that textile is going to go back into the loop and it's going to be made into another item. Next slide, please. So as we continue to look at all aspects of our business, one of our major hurdles is our shipping waste. So how do you get these garments, sustainable or not, to a consumer in a sustainable way? There's 165 billion packages shipped in the US each year, which equals more than 1 billion trees and 140 billion gallons of water used. And at the rate that our e-commerce platform, everyone's e-commerce businesses are growing, recycling plants can't keep up with that demand. And so we really need to have different long-term solutions. So we partnered with an organization called Lime Loop, and we are trying to transition to all reusable shippers instead of our normal recycled paper mailers. And these shippers are made from durable vinyl, and they're actually made from old billboards. So the billboard comes down and it's upcycled into this reusable shipper. And the way these work is you're a customer and you're trying to purchase something from our website, you opt into using a reusable shipper to get your items. You get a return label, it gets shipped back to our warehouse and is reused and reused and reused again for a lifespan of about 10 years. And these are pretty incredible shipping options for people, and it's a really major step in for a business to become circular and for a consumer to opt into a sustainable shipping method. Next slide. So we are proud to be one of the founding members of the Renewal Workshop, which is a re-commerce program that cleans, repairs, renews, and certifies old clothing items to be resold. And the Renewal Workshop has identified that 82% of inventory that has been deemed unsellable due to like stains or holes or just normal wear and tear can actually be fixed and resold. So we work with the Renewal Workshop by sending towed garments that are old and stained and a thrift store won't even take them, and they'll actually restore them and resell them to another consumer. In addition to that, as a partner of the Renewal Workshop, they actually provide us with feedback to our designers and our team so that we can know about the limitations and the options that we have in our design choices to make sure that everything we create can ultimately be renewed or recycled. Next slide. So to go back to this original diagram of the linear versus the circular model, it's really important to note that potentially the most important piece of this model is the last step, which is the consumer. The consumer has all of the power, and we as the consumer have the power to decide, what do we initially purchase? Is it recycled material? Is it synthetic? Is it a natural fiber? We have the power to decide where that item ends up when it finishes its life cycle with us and we don't have any use for it anymore. And we have the power to change our mindset from this is waste to this has value. So the consumer is the one that can create the demand for the circular economy so that more and more brands and organizations can move towards a circular model. So what I empower everyone to do today is go home and look in your closet. What are your clothes made out of? Can you fix them if they're ripped? Can you recognize that there's a lot of value in that item? And also recognize that there's a huge environmental impact that went into making that one item. And what is your choice going to be to get that item back into a circular model once you're done with it? So I'd love to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That was a great presentation, and it's really fun to hear what a local company is doing to make their product part of the circular economy. And I just want to say, I feel like it was a couple years ago, we actually ordered some clothes from you guys online, and I was so excited to try that reusable shipper, as you called it. We popped it back in the mail and sent it back to you guys, and it worked great. And so let's look at some of our questions here. We do have quite a few. looks like we have butterflies interested, and you touched on this a little bit on the cost of growing the process and transporting fabrics internationally instead of locally.
Yeah, so the cost and the environmental impact of that, there's a lot. And so you have to look at a lot of different parts of the supply chain. So when we're looking at our supply chain and our producers or the factories that are actually making our garments, we have to ensure that they have all the environmental certifications that they need so that they will meet our standards. We have a really rigorous process, and an example of that is our factory that makes our hemp and the growing process is all solar farm. So we try within every single aspect of that supply chain to say, how is this farm, growing its plants, what sustainable practices they're using. And that's something that we're continuously working on. And since we've had, the organization's been around for 25 years, we've grown these partners and have a lot of really great partnerships. And so that is something that we focus on when we actually make a new partner or we work with a new, manufacturer.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Some of this questions that folks are asking, like where can we take shoes and other clothing? We'll actually come back to that with some of our upcoming speakers. But there was a question, and it wasn't a resource you talked about, but they were asking, how is bamboo, from Diane, how is bamboo as a source, as a sustainability-wise, I believe her question.
Yeah, bamboo is actually not a very sustainable fiber, and it's actually because it takes a lot of water and chemicals to break it down. If you think about bamboo, it's so hard and hardy. It actually takes a lot to break it apart. So a better alternative to bamboo is something like tencel, which is extremely soft and a really incredible fabric, and that doesn't take as much to actually break down the eucalyptus tree. So bamboo would be on our list of not so great fabrics and fibers, and on our website there's a sustainability cheat sheet, so you can look and just quickly understand like what is sustainable, what is not, so you can make really quick choices, and we can send that out after the presentation as well.
Oh, great. That'd be a great resource to share. That's really interesting too, because I knew bamboo was really fast growing and it used a lot of water, but I didn't think about how fibrous the material is and the resources and energy that goes into breaking that into a usable fiber. It's really interesting.
Yeah,
and just real quick, where did it go? Someone just had a question if it was only Horny Toad working with the renewal workshop or if there were other companies. And then we, unfortunately, we'll have to get to the rest of the questions at the end of our webinar.
Yeah, there are other organizations that are working with the renewal workshop. We were just kind of helped get them founding members and started working them from the beginning, but lots of organizations work with them, and I can give as well an address so that you know where you can send your items to be renewed so that they can be get a new life.
That's so great. That's so fun to hear about all the new resources coming up beyond our local thrift stores and supporting those as well. So thank you so much again, Sarah. That was really interesting and so informative. And I'm going to hand it back to Kathy now, who's going to introduce our next speaker. Kathy.
Thank you, Penny. Yes, here we go, moving along. We're going to hear from the City of Santa Barbara, and Brian Latchford is the Public Information Officer for the City of Santa Barbara Environmental Services Division. Brian's role is to help the public understand how to fully utilize the modern solid waste services provided by the city. Brian joined the division in 2015 and brings a wealth of experience in marketing and communications for sustainability. He holds a bachelor's degree in biology and earth science from Cornell University and a master's degree in environmental science and management from UCSB's Bren School. And I think Brian's going to start with a poll. Iris.
Yes, yeah. Start with a quick little poll. So how many pounds of trash are created per day per resident in the city of Santa Barbara?
And this is per day. When I was looking at this the other day, I saw it as per year, and I thought, oh, that's not too bad, but it's per day.
Yeah, this is an average, but per day per resident for the city of Santa Barbara. So not necessarily. If you're in a different community, you have to guess for us.
And there you go.
Okay. All right. This is pretty good. So 6 was the highest guess, and then 4. So if we want to move on to the first slide, or I guess maybe the second slide. Yeah, the next slide, please. So it's actually 6. So as of 2017, 6 pounds of trash disposed per day per resident. So if you're thinking about that maybe seeming like too much, we have to think about where our actually trash comes from. It's not just what we throw out at home, it's what we throw out in our businesses, in our offices, but it's also our impact for trash community-wide. So if you're going to a restaurant, you're shopping in a retail store, those places are also generating trash based on what they're providing to you, as well as services like infrastructure, materials use for, say water, gas, electric use. There's trash being disposed of in those areas as well. So we do all have a kind of a shared impact by living in the community. So let's go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to kind of put the perspective back on, okay, I'm, for the city of Santa Barbara, I'm in the Environmental Services Division. Our wheelhouse really is recycled materials, and trying to divert things from the landfill back into the system, and also making suggestions for how to do that, where to bring your objects, and trying to keep materials in use. That's been what we've been focusing on the last few decades since this office even existed, since the services we have been providing. But we really need to start shifting our focus, and I'll talk about why, to some of the other things on the circular economy kind of wheel here. So first I'll kind of focus on what things we've been doing recently to improve our diversion from the landfill. Next slide. So there's a new facility that's being built up at the Tehigas landfill, which is just north of Santa Barbara, called the Resource Center. It's a new facility being built by the Santa Barbara County, and the funding for this facility is coming from increased trash rates, which are impacted across the county-wide. Anyone who's paying for trash services will be essentially funding this new project. And Sarah Stark from Marburg will be talking more about the specifics of what is happening at this facility. Marburg has been contracted to run the materials recovery facility up there. But I wanted to bring this resource center up because it's a huge project. It's about $130+ million in order to better process our materials locally. And better, I mean, by increasing our diversion from the landfill possibly up to 85% is the goal. And so the reason we're doing that is because we know moving forwards in time, we're going to have more and more materials, and we need to do better at limiting our greenhouse gas impacts and diverting those materials. But at the same time, we do need to reflect on the fact that we are assuming that we're going to be generating more and more materials, because that's not always the best approach. We're taking care of what we know to be the future, but we really need to shift our behaviors. So next slide. So a lot of things in our daily lives are not recyclable. And unfortunately, there's a big reason for that. A lot of these materials are really flimsy, low quality materials, and they were sold to us or given to us as a consumer because they were the cheapest option. They're the easiest thing to produce. They're usually virgin materials. For instance, a lot of these plastics are not made from recyclable sources. And no matter what, we can keep trying to focus on, once we have something in our hands, what do we do with it? How do we get it recycled? But there really is a lot going on in the kind of upper circular economy model that we need to start focusing on and really shifting our behavior to do that. And the reason is, if you can go to the next slide, actually, the reason is we can keep focusing on recycling markets, but recycling markets only exist when there are companies out there that want to recycle the material and want to bring that material back into the fold. And the only reason that will happen is if more companies are then using recycled content and are actually investing in materials and spending possibly more money to use recycled materials rather than virgin materials, choosing more durable components. And a lot of our plastics, we're seeing a big drop off in the last few years that we can keep focusing on recycling, but all of a sudden if there's not a market, like what happened in 2018, where China decided that they didn't want to impact their environment as much and accept most of our plastics and paper, all of a sudden the market drops out. And a lot of these lower quality plastics, we don't have anywhere to send them. So we really do need to long-term shift our focus. Next slide, please. So we need to move up this wheel. We need to think about focusing on keeping products in use and overall decreasing consumption. And that's why I brought up that poll. It's not necessarily just about trying to get things more recycled. It's about decreasing consumption overall. And that includes the amount of materials that we're generating that we expect there to be a spot to recycle them and keep them out of the landfill. Next slide. So we've all heard the 3 R's, and it's in this order for a reason. It's not just a fun saying, it's actually a hierarchy. Reduce first and foremost, reuse second, and lastly, recycle when you couldn't have done the other 2. And then of course, after that, we have disposal into our landfill or some other source. But reducing is always the most impactful on the environment and on the system. Next slide. So what can we do as individuals moving forwards? Really think about our lives and kind of do what we call a waste audit. Thinking about what you're purchasing, what you're throwing away, where can you save money? Did you really need that, that extra tool, or could you have borrowed it from someone else for that one time you're going to use it a year? Buying and fixing durable goods, thinking about, well, this is broken. Let me look locally to see if there's something I can fix. I had a lamp that broke and I actually brought it to a lamp store recently and had it rewired instead of buying a new lamp. Better planning overall, and that really goes for food purchases as well, making sure that food isn't going bad first, making sure that you know what's in your fridge and in your cupboards before you go and buy more, and buying used and selling used, trying to keep some of the things that are already out there in the rather than buying new materials, and demanding better from the products, making sure we're buying better materials, more durable materials, and that we're asking more of the companies that are selling us these products to invest in take-back programs, to invest in valuing the end of life of their own products. Next slide. So a few quick things that you can do are just really try and get rid of those single-use products in your daily life. Nowadays, it's a little harder with COVID, of course, in some of our to-go restaurants. You know, a lot of the restaurants or a lot of the supermarkets weren't allowing reusable bags, but some are now, as long as you bag things yourself. But there are a lot of single-use things that we can just first and foremost get rid of and are super low quality. So we're not really going to be able to recycle those to begin with. And also I put in there challenge vendors. Again, it's really ask more from the places you're buying products to say, hey, where do I recycle this? What do I do when I'm done using this product that you are selling me? Because they should know exactly what's going to happen to that product. And reuse containers that you can't normally recycle. So we've had a change where food plastic containers are no longer recyclable. You can use those at home for Tupperware. There are many uses that we can give the products that we already have and we kind of already expect to throw out. We just need to do a little bit more digging for that. Next slide. A big thing that our restaurants and just any other business that is kind of giving out single-use products, even for office spaces, is really focusing on washables. Focusing on spending a little more time cleaning and going through, you know, spending a little more investment in the beginning to get some washable materials rather than just buying really cheap single-use products that are going to exit the facility and then get thrown out somewhere else and fall onto the consumer. And that's a really big way we can just get rid of a lot of these single-use products that just end up in the trash, unfortunately. Next slide. So focusing up beyond the repair and reuse and decreasing our waste consumption, this area is really focused on the actual initial products, focusing on the businesses and having them design out the waste from the very start, thinking about what is going to happen to this product as my customer uses it, and then what they're going to do once it's done being used. And designing out the pollution. So that could be essentially in the distribution channel. And shipping, how can you package it smaller? How can you fit more into the one package that you're already giving out there? There are many ways to do that. Next slide. So kind of just to give you an idea of how this connects to some of the businesses and what they can do. This is one example where we actually have some take-back programs specifically with beverages. So Kaji Coffee, Juice Ranch, they all give out a material, whether it be a smoothie sealed bottle or whether it be coffee in a cup, and they include a deposit. Sometimes it's a few dollars just to get that cup. But that also provides an incentive for the material to come back to them. So you return, you either get a refund for that deposit or they replace it with another one. They clean and sanitize, they refill it, and there we go. There is no, we don't have to worry about that impacting recycling system because it's actually just getting reused and contained in that system. So those are some local examples, and we'll go to the next slide for some national examples. So this is a bigger picture. There are some companies that are now realizing, okay, we do need to invest in this take back program for a lot of our materials. There's a company called Loop that is now trying to work with some of the biggest brands to actually get reusable containers, which you purchase with an increased deposit. You do send it back in a box or bag. There's, of course, shipping, greenhouse gases associated with that. At Blush Cosmetics is one where you can actually bring back the containers and they clean and refill them. Concentrated cleaning solution is one thing I'm seeing. Most of our cleaning solutions and liquid detergents and stuff are not concentrated and are just a ton of water, and we have Water Easy at the top at home. So buying smaller bottles of concentrate and actually diluting it yourself with your own water saves a ton of greenhouse gas, and shipping that essentially just water all across the US. So these are some national trends that we're seeing, but it's still a very small, a really small number of businesses that are doing this. And so we do have to, as a society, shift to putting some burden back onto the businesses or the manufacturers that are really producing these materials. Next slide. And so in thinking about this, there's of course a lot of power in purchasing, and you can choose, but sometimes there really isn't a way to do that. There really aren't other options for better recyclable products. And so in the area of kind of organic waste, for instance, there are some new legislation where it's asking municipalities to now go back in and say, okay, talk to your restaurants, talk to the supermarkets, making sure that there's planning and there's ways for organics to not get wasted, essentially. Make sure that we can recover some edible food. There's always edible food out there that's just getting thrown out. Well, can we set up systems where that food is recovered? And there's the Santa Barbara Food Action Network in town. That's going to be a huge impact on our edible food recovery. And there has been some legislation that's tried to increase circularity in materials at the state level, saying essentially if you're going to create something and sell it out to Californians, it needs to have some sort of recyclability built into the material. Unfortunately, we still need more purchasing power. We need more support for these initiatives so that we can hold companies to a better standard, so that the burden doesn't fall on the consumer and the individual. And I think that's my last slide. So again, I'll leave you with, if there's any questions about purchasing decisions and how do I buy a greener product, what is greener, is this recyclable? If there's any kind of questions like that, as a business or an individual, our team is always here to help. Our phone number is right there, and that's our website. And so, yeah, we're here to answer questions.
Thank you, Brian. I have a question. We have questions piling up in the Q&A, but I get to go first. One area that I was listening for and would like to hear a little bit more about is compostable containers. That's a question that comes up for us quite often. And also, some of the grocery stores, there's one particular one in town that's using the compostable produce bags now, and those turn up a lot in the collection that we do with ablets, which they are not allowed in because they obviously are not plastic and break down differently. What are people supposed to think about compostable containers?
Well, so there's all different types of compostable containers, but I would, the biggest and most important thing I would say is that if it looks and feels like plastic, it's probably a plastic. So plastic is just a type of material. It could be made from plants or it could be made from oil. A lot of the plastics, the compostable plastics that we're seeing out there, are potentially compostable. They can break down into their components with high heat and processing in a specialized facility, which your area has to have, and you have to have a collection system to collect it and bring it to that facility. So there's a lot of caveats to the products when a company says, oh, it's compostable. It doesn't mean it's compostable everywhere, because you might not actually have those facilities to do that. And so it's really important to think about Compostable is still a single use. You're still buying it and you're throwing it away, and it needs to get handled and shipped and processed and turned into something else. So that's still a lot of energy and resources. Was there a way we could have avoided that single use product altogether? And so for a lot of the ones that look and feel like plastic, those are by far the worst. Those bags, for instance, they are a type of plastic. It's a bioplastic. It's so thin that it actually, I think some of them are backyard compostable, which means you don't need a high heat processing facility. But unfortunately, if certain things like that get out into the environment, say a cool ocean water, that thing might break down a little bit in the UV light, but it's still gonna look and act like any other plastic bag out in the ocean. So we do need to think about, yeah, it's not necessarily better if there's actually not a place for it. If someone says something is, if a business says it's recyclable or it's compostable, that's not true. You need to check with your local municipality, because recycling rules vary based on city, county, and state. So you need to, yeah, unfortunately, there's not enough rules out there to regulate those kinds of phrases like recyclable and compostable with products.
Right, thank you. And that's a really good point, that compostable containers are still single use and still takes a certain amount of energy to make them. So we should be cognizant of that and not think of that as some sort of, cure-all. And just a follow-up to that, in our question and answer section is Patty asking, and this could be kind of a loaded question, so sorry about that, Brian. Will Santa Barbara ever have a residential composting program?
So as of right now, the Resource Center, which Sarah will go through a little bit more in the next presentation, that is set up and designed to actually pull our organics out of the trash. So any of the organic materials, whether it be soiled paper, like napkins or paper towels, or food waste, for instance, that stuff will get pulled out and will be anaerobically digested and turned into compost and renewable energy, essentially. So as of right now, it's the biggest issue with implementing a municipal composting system is that you not only need a different collection system, so you need new bins in an already space constrained city, you need different trucks to pick those up, different routes, just for that one type of material. And the infrastructure is a big cost. And even in other very, very green cities that have had these residential composting facilities, they still only see very small participation, and then even smaller amount of actual material recovered from that. So it's a big upfront cost, and potentially an even bigger greenhouse gas contributor if you're thinking about all the different truck routes and everything going on there. And for very little return. So what we've decided to do is invest in the Resource Center and to cover that. But we are thinking about rolling out we're rolling out a pilot for some municipal family, multi-unit family apartment buildings that would start to do that. And we already have composting for our schools and for our businesses, offices included.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And it has to be correct, so
there's a lot of training involved. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no room for error on that. So thank you, Brian. If you have more questions for Brian, you can keep contributing them to the Q&A, and we will get back at the end of the session with our main Q&A. For right now, we have another video to share with you. This one focuses on what individuals can do as part of kind of a barter system circular economy.
Thanks again to the Team Pharos for that great little video. It's fun to think about alternative economies. And for our final speaker today, I'm very pleased to introduce Sarah Stark. She's been busy answering a lot of questions already in the chat. Thanks so much, Sarah. Sarah Stark is the Environmental Compliance and Outreach Coordinator with Marburg Industries. In her role with Marburg, she works closely with the City of Santa Barbara and surrounding jurisdictions to ensure that businesses and residential complexes are in compliance with state and local recycling laws. In addition, she gives tours and provides other outreach opportunities to children and adults from preschool to retirement communities. She earned her master's in environmental science and management from the Bren School at UC Santa Barbara, where she also launched a nonprofit called Smarty Pants that teaches kids how to be good environmental stewards. Thanks so much, Sarah, for joining us. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I think I have a poll as well to start it off. All right. How many pounds of carpet are sent to California landfills each year? Just California, and in 1 year. Started off on a positive note. All right, let's see. Oh, wow. Good job. The correct answer is 320 million pounds. So you guys are right on. Awesome. I am ready for my slides. Thank you. All right, so today I'm going to be walking through a few different types of materials and talking about how they fit into a circular economy, as well as looking at some innovations in that space for how we deal with these materials. So I'm going to start by talking about two bulky items, carpet, as I just hinted at, and mattresses, and then we'll go into commingled recycling and organics. Next slide. So I wanted to start with carpet and mattresses because these two items have similar stories. They're both considered what we call bulky or large items. They are recyclable, but it's often inconvenient for people to recycle them, or maybe just not easy to do so because we don't take them in our regular recycling containers. Carpet, we have over 320 million pounds being sent to California landfills each year, as we just learned. And that's largely due to the fact that we do not have a good recycling infrastructure for carpet. They're a really complex material. They're actually considered a system of parts, with the main components being face fibers, which is what you step on or what you feel, and then the backing. And although there are 4 common types of face fibers, they each have completely different properties, so they do need to be separated if they're going to be recycled. In addition, the backing systems can consist of several different components. Usually it's latex or PVC that fuses the backing to the front, which renders carpets almost impossible to separate. Sometimes they even throw polypropylene in the mix, so another type of plastic in there. And then the filler is often an entirely different material, usually calcium carbonate. So all of the steps in collecting carpet, separating them, shredding them, and recycling them leads to a really expensive recycling process. Next slide. So in 2002, a nonprofit known as CARE was established, and that stands for Carpet America Recovery Act. So this is a national nonprofit that oversees carpet recycling and reclamation goals and targets that were established by the carpet industry along with a number of states, the EPA, and some NGOs. And they oversee the California Carpet Stewardship Program, which is obviously what we have in our state. And so in 2010, a law was enacted to incentivize the growth of carpet reclamation and recycling in California. And one of the ways that they do this is by implementing a fee. It's called an assessment fee on carpet. So at the point of sale, for any carpet sold and or shipped in California, it costs 35 cents per square yard. And this fee actually helps to establish a market for post-consumer products. Next slide. So carpet can be recycled. That can be recycled into fiber or plastic pellets and then turned into new products. So some of the examples are pictured here. Other examples include railroad ties, composite lumber, roofing shingles. It can even be recycled back into carpet itself. But it is important to know that a lot of these items are being downcycled. So at the end of the day, they, at the end of their lives, I guess I should say, they will be ending up in the landfill regardless. So it's kind of a step in the circular direction, but not truly a circular economy just yet. Next slide. And mattresses have a very similar story to carpet. Unfortunately, people throw these out with reckless abandon. I'm sure you've seen them around town. That's a local picture of one of our mattresses. More than 50,000 are discarded in the United States each day. And just as we discussed with carpet, there's really a lack of recycling infrastructure for them. Next slide. And because they're difficult to recycle, the Mattress Recycling Council has created a nationwide program known as Bye Bye Mattress. And this is designed to encourage the public to bring mattresses to recycling centers to keep them out of the landfill and get them recycled. About 75% of a mattress can be recycled, so it's certainly worth doing so. And this image, if you can see, kind of breaks down where the components might go to be recycled into another use. And again, similar to carpet, we do have a fee on all mattresses and box springs that are sold in California. You pay $10.50. That fee is set by the state of California, and it helps fund the recycling efforts in our state. This is a national program, but California, Connecticut, and Rhode Island are the states that have the most robust mattress recycling programs so far. And so with mattresses and carpets, we can sort of think about how their aspects of circularity were implemented after we created them. Creating post-consumer markets and identifying how to recycle components of these items is great. But to be most effective in a circular economy, you really have to look at it from a design process. Next slide. So there is a company, a European company based in the Netherlands called DSM Niaga. Niaga is the word again, spelled backwards. And they have actually come up with a circular model for carpets and mattresses. Their carpets are really simplified. They're made of either just one or two types of materials. And then the bread and butter of what they do is really what they call a click-unclick adhesive. So they've developed their own adhesive, which allows carpet to be fused together and then separated at the end of its life. Next slide. And so they've really created a closed loop system for their carpets where they can create a carpet, pull it apart, get those components back, recycle them, and make new carpet again. So really, really neat way that they do that. Next slide. And again, with the mattresses, it's pretty similar. They're using very minimal materials, just polyester and steel. And then their mattresses are actually modular and fully recyclable. So you can pull apart the 6 components that might need to be replaced over the mattress's life. And then they can do that, replace it with things like yarn or their adhesive or Velcro. And at the end of the day, they take those materials back, repurpose them, and use them again. So there are challenges, associated with creating a circular product like they've done. For one, you rely on getting those materials back at the end of the product's life. And then also you are designing that recycling infrastructure from the ground up. So that can be a real challenge. Next slide. So locally, our waste management efforts are moving towards circularity with the resource center that, as Brian mentioned, is currently under construction at the Tehigas landfill. And this multi-jurisdictional project is designed to keep more recyclables and organics out of the landfill. Because, while one brand building a supply chain for a product is awesome and definitely important, it can be really difficult to scale that. And if we think about commingled recycling, so that's plastics, paper, metal, and glass, anything we're tossing in our curbside cart, one way to scale the circularity of those items is to make sure that we're getting good, high quality, clean post-consumer products to use for new applications. Next slide. So Brian mentioned also that Marburg will be operating the material recovery facility, also known as a MRF, up at the resource center. And so we can help drive the markets for post-consumer materials by utilizing technology. So things like optical sorters and other screening methods can help us get more high quality and clean materials. better sorting then leads to better bales, higher quality bales of material. That means there's greater potential and more variety for those items to be used in new products or in packaging, whatever it might be. Next slide. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention the organics process up at the Resource Center, because they're actually going to be processed in a very circular manner, which is exciting. The county will be utilizing an anaerobic digester to process organics like green waste, food waste, soiled paper, and ultimately they'll get turned into a compost. So the compost will be put back into the earth to ultimately grow more organic products, green waste, or greens, plants, food. So that in itself is a nice closed loop. And then the process of anaerobic digestion also creates biomethane. So a portion of that will, actually all of that will be used for renewable energy. A portion of that is going to actually power the facility that runs it. And then another portion of that is going to be used to power homes in our community, which is really neat. The anaerobic digester also yields a digestate. So that's what ultimately gets turned into a compost. But if the rest of it that doesn't actually gets put back into the anaerobic digester for the next round of organics to be processed. So again, within this big closed loop, there's sort of two other little loops going on as well. So, this is a good example of a closed loop system that hopefully more materials can follow in the footsteps of. But pretty exciting that we have something like this going on in our own community. And I believe that's all I have for you. So happy to take some questions.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. It's really interesting to hear about what's happening with mattresses and carpets locally, and also some examples of companies doing some great work to really on the design level of the circular economy and changing that production and manufacturing. There were some questions folks were interested. It was DSM Niaga, is that correct, the name of that company?
Yes,
we'll share
DSM,
that link.
And then the word again spelled backwards.
They were in the Netherlands, you said? Looks like here in our Q&A, as you might expect, there's quite a few questions about the new facility, the Resource Center. From Celeste, folks are interested in knowing if the North County will benefit from the Resource Center. And then we had another question about if the public would be available to tour the facility once it's completed.
Yeah, good questions. So I am actually not totally sure about the ins and outs.
It's still a long ways off, right?
It's not that long off, hopefully. The MRF, so Marburg is really most directly involved with the MRF up there. So that's just one component of it. That's the recycling process. And so that we are hoping to begin testing out the equipment mid-December with the goal of being operational in the first quarter of next year. I believe the last date I heard for the anaerobic digester was to start receiving organics the first week of February. So that then they'll be testing that and making sure everything's running as it should be. That would be, Brian might know the answer to that as far as which jurisdictions are participating. But it will be open for tours. I'm just not sure when that will be due to COVID, but they do have a really awesome multi-purpose room up there with a lot of cool stuff. So they're certainly going to be doing tours.
Excellent. I work with a lot of student groups, and I always encourage them to visit the landfill and just to think about that whole process of our waste and where it actually goes. It looks like we have another question from Tim. Katie kind of grabbed at it a little bit, but does Marburg pick up used mattresses in Box Springs? I know that there's the option to drop them off, but I didn't know if there was a pickup option.
Yeah, we do pick up bulky items. So if you are the account holder of your trash and recycling bill, you're entitled to 2 free bulky item pickups per year within the city of Santa Barbara. All of the jurisdictions that we serve have bulky item pickups available. The rules and days and all that vary a little bit. So it'd be worth reaching out to us if you have a specific question. And if you don't pay the trash bill, you can pay for Marburg to pick it up. Or like I mentioned, you can drop it off for free at a Marburg facility.
Great, thank you. It's just always good to get that information out there.
Yeah, please don't leave it on the side of the street.
Thank you. Yeah, that's one of our things. We often find them thrown over bridges into creeks, and then they get wet, and then they're even more heavy to drag out and are more difficult to transport. Yes, we have one final question about the Resource Center. and it's about the compost, that final gestate. Will it be available? Will it be going to local farmers?
You know, I'm not sure if they've set up the end market yet for that. Again, that would be more of a county question because they're the ones operating the anaerobic digester. But if you do have specific questions and want to follow up with me, I can certainly refer people to the right point of contact over there.
Yeah, it's
Thanks.
my understanding it depends on the inputs too, where the material is coming from, whether it's directly from a food scraps collection program or from the negatively sorted trash. It just depends, and then what markets exist at the time based on the levels in the food, so, or in the compost.
Right, that makes sense. Thanks, Brian. Well, thanks again, Sarah, and thanks to all our presenters. There's some really great information being shared with the community today, and we were really excited to get everybody together. I'm going to bring Kathy back up here and ask all our panelists to please join us for the Q&A. There's quite a variety of questions here, and we'll just kind of work through them as we can.
Yeah, in the few minutes that we have left, it's been great to answer some of these questions as we've gone along, and thank you to the people behind the scenes who have been answering questions. There's one here for Sarah from Toad & Co. Do you know how much of your clothing is earned through retail outlets, and would Toad & Co. ever consider a take-back program?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We do get a lot of returned clothing to our retail outlets. We also get a lot of returned clothing to our warehouse if you were to buy it e-commerce. We have a very generous return policy, and we have been looking into a kind of take-back program where we can offer credits to our, to buy something new or get something else if you want to kind of move through the cycle and get something new for something old. So we are looking into that right now.
Great, thank you. Somebody else, Jenny had a question. What happens to clothes donated to thrift stores? And this might be something more broad that Dr. Geyer might want to address. What happens to clothes donated to thrift stores like Goodwill and other nonprofits that use the money for their organization? And I guess the bigger part of that question too is like, what are the ultimate end of those products if there isn't someone who is going to use? Anybody want to take that?
Yeah, maybe Dr. Geyer would be a good person to take that. I know you have a lot of experience there.
Yeah, I can talk to that a little bit. I mean, I think there's a lot of sorting and inspection going on. So there are sort of high value items that then, obviously their shop floor area is very limited. So they have to really decide what they are going to try and resell locally. That's only going to be sort of the most attractive things. So there's going to be a lot of bulk that still has a market, but it's international. And then, there's a fair amount of that sort of returned clothes that then goes to sort of developing economies, like Africa or Latin America. And that is, I would say, from a social and environmental sustainability perspective, a bit of a mixed bag, I would say. You could make all kinds of arguments why that is not a great solution, right? The one thing in terms of social sustainability is that it sort of suppresses or hinders the development of a local garment industry in those recipient countries. Another is that actually once it's sort of that clothing has reached the end of its second life, it's actually more likely to end up in the natural environment rather than a well-managed landfill. So there's a lot of concern around that. Yeah, and then clothing that doesn't even make it there, there is, it can be sort of turned, it sort of tends to get ripped up, and then maybe some of it gets turned into, again, sort of insulation material. Those kind of things. So yeah, again, just like Brian said, and I think also Sarah said, the greenest piece of garment you have is the one in your closet, so just keep it as long as you can.
Thank you. And there's sort of a follow-up question on that from Ginny that you might also know, Dr. Geyer. Are there accreditation or certification programs that people can look for when they're purchasing products that tell them that they are made for to be part of the circular economy?
I wish there were, and maybe Sarah, Brian, you know more there, but I'm not really aware of any labels there. So I mean, you know, there's sort of sometimes products are labeled in terms of recycled content, right, which is sort of one indicator, right? And then if you see that, you always want to look out for post-consumer recycled content. Sometimes it just says recycled content and it turns out to be pre-consumer, which is typically waste material that gets recycled anyway. So that, you know, you could there's sort of borderline greenwashing. But I mean, on the state level, CalRecycle, you know, the state agency that manages resource recovery, they do have an active program called Extended Producer Responsibility. So that's sort of the umbrella term for all kinds of legislation that is trying to really make producers more responsible for the end of life of their products. But it's challenging, as you can imagine, because it really means that companies have to completely rethink the way they run their businesses. So the short answer is no, I don't think there's much currently in terms of labeling for circular economy.
Well, I guess it's something that we have to demand on the consumer side. It's you know, nice to see the examples that Sarah showed us of mattresses and carpet that are made more that they're easier to take apart and recycle. I heard of a clothing company that's doing that too, where everything from the zipper to the pockets to the lining are all made from the same materials. So look for things like that as well. We have kind of unbelievably reached the end of our time today. Thank you for hanging with us on kind of this extended map. Really wanted to take a deeper dive to the content, and in 60 minutes didn't seem enough to contain that. So we appreciate you being with us today. We will be sending you a follow-up email with resources, and I regret that we didn't get to all your questions, but I hope we got to most of them. And like I said, you can reach out to me and with your other questions, and I'll try to point you in the right direction. So thank you again to all of my co-host Penny and our panel, very distinguished group that we had with us today. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.